The rain had been falling for hours by the time I clocked in for my second shift of the day. My feet already ached from the morning cafe run, and now I had 6 more hours ahead of me at the Riverside restaurant. The place tourists loved for its view of the Han River, and locals avoided because they knew better. I tied my apron with practiced efficiency, the black fabric already worn thin at the edges from too many washes. The restaurant had that particular kind of quiet that comes just before the dinner rush, a held breath before chaos. I could hear the kitchen staff arguing in rapid Korean, the clatter of pots, the hiss of something frying in oil that smelled faintly of ginger and garlic. "Table 7 needs water," Manager Kim barked, without looking up from his clipboard. He never looked up. I sometimes wondered if he'd recognize me if we passed on the street. "On it," I replied, grabbing a pitcher from the service station. Table 7 was occupied by the usual evening crowd. Middle-aged businessmen in slightly rumpled suits, ties loosened, voices growing louder with each round of soju. They barely registered my presence as I filled their glasses, which suited me fine. Invisible was safe in a place like this. I'd been working here for 8 months now, ever since I'd arrived in Seoul with a tourist visa that had long since expired and a bank account that couldn't afford proper immigration lawyers. The restaurant paid cash, asked no questions, and kept the lights on in my tiny studio apartment in Hongdae. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. As I returned the pitcher to the station, I noticed him. He sat alone at table 12, the corner booth with the best view of the river. He always sat there. Same table, same time. 3 evenings a week like clockwork. I'd started to think of him as the jasmine tea man, because that's all he ever ordered. No food, just tea. And he always brought a book. Tonight he was reading something with a dark blue cover, his long fingers turning pages with careful precision. He wore a simple charcoal sweater and dark slacks. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed wealth, but there was something about the way he carried himself. The posture of someone who didn't need to demand attention because it came naturally. I'd never really looked at him closely before. Why would I? Customers were customers. But tonight, with the rain creating a hypnotic rhythm against the windows, and the soft lighting casting shadows across his angular features, I found myself studying him. He had the kind of face that belonged in a historical drama. Sharp jawline, high cheekbones, eyes that seemed to hold centuries of careful observation. His hair was styled simply, swept back from his forehead, revealing a slight widow's peak. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow, barely visible unless you were looking for it. He glanced up suddenly, and our eyes met for the briefest moment. I felt something shift in my chest. Not attraction exactly, but recognition. Like meeting someone you've known in another life, though that was ridiculous. I didn't believe in past lives. I looked away quickly, busying myself with wiping down menus that didn't need wiping. "Sujina," Manager Kim's voice cut through my distraction. "Table 12 needs more hot water for his tea." Of course he did. I prepared a fresh pot with the jasmine pearls we kept specifically for him. Another oddity I'd noticed. We didn't stock jasmine tea for regular customers, but somehow there was always a tin available when he arrived. As I approached his table, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. His hands, elegant as they were, bore faint scars across the knuckles. The kind of scars that came from fighting, not accidents. My older brother had similar marks from his brief stint in underground boxing before our parents found out. "Your tea, sir?" I said in Korean, setting down the pot with steady hands. "Thank you," he replied, his voice quiet but carrying an unusual depth. He spoke Korean with perfect fluency, but there was something in his intonation, a slight formality that suggested it might not be his first language, or perhaps that he'd been educated abroad. He returned to his book without another word. Dismissed, I returned to my station. The evening progressed with its usual rhythm. More customers arrived, orders were taken, food was served, bills were paid. I moved through it all with the efficiency of someone who'd done this routine hundreds of times, my mind partly elsewhere. I thought about the electricity bill due next week, the leaking faucet in my bathroom that I couldn't afford to fix properly, the Korean language classes I'd had to quit because I needed the evening hours for this job. Small disappointments that accumulated like raindrops, each one insignificant alone, but together forming a flood. Around 9 o'clock, Table 6 filled up with a group that immediately set my internal alarm ringing. 5 men, all wearing expensive suits that fit too perfectly, moving with the synchronized awareness of people trained to notice threats. They spoke in low voices, heads close together, and Manager Kim personally took their order, something he never did. I tried not to stare, but one of them caught my eye. He was younger than the others, maybe late 20s, with bleached blonde hair and a neck tattoo partially visible above his collar. When he noticed me looking, he smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. I focused on my other tables, but I could feel their presence like a cold spot in the room. At 10:15, just as I was beginning to think about my aching feet and the long subway ride home, I noticed one of the men from Table 6 stand and walk past Table 12. It happened so quickly I almost missed it. A small piece of paper, folded into quarters, dropped onto the Jasmine Tea Man's table as the blonde man passed. The Jasmine Tea Man didn't look up from his book, didn't acknowledge the paper, just continued reading as if nothing had happened. But I saw it. A white square of paper sitting next to his teacup, looking innocent and deadly all at once. I shouldn't have cared. Whatever business these men conducted had nothing to do with me. I was just the waitress. Invisible, forgettable, safe. But curiosity has always been my weakness. When I went to clear Table 6 10 minutes later, they'd left suddenly, dropping cash on the table without waiting for change. I passed close enough to Table 12 to see that the paper was still there, unopened. The Jasmine Tea Man continued reading, seemingly oblivious. My hand moved almost without conscious thought. As I reached for a stray napkin on his table, my fingers brushed against the folded paper. In one smooth motion, born from months of practiced efficiency, I palmed it and continued to the service station. My heart hammered as I stepped into the narrow hallway leading to the kitchen, ducking into the small alcove where we kept extra supplies. The paper felt like it was burning through my apron pocket. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. The message was brief, written in tight, coded characters I couldn't fully decipher. But certain words stood out. Shipment, midnight, Pier 7, and a series of numbers that meant nothing to me. This was bad. This was the kind of thing that got people hurt, or worse. I should have left it alone. Should have put it back. Should have pretended I'd never seen it. Instead, I found myself pulling out the small notepad I used for taking orders and tearing off a clean page. My pen hovered over the paper for a moment, my practical side warring with something I couldn't quite name. Compassion, maybe, or the kind of reckless impulse that had gotten me into trouble before. I wrote quickly, before I could change my mind. You look tired. Has anyone asked if you're okay? It was absurd, ridiculous. What kind of person writes a concerned note to a stranger who was clearly involved in something dangerous? But I'd seen his eyes when they briefly met mine earlier. Behind the careful control, behind the expensive clothes and the perfect posture, I'd glimpsed something exhausted, something human. I folded my note into an identical square, slipped it into my apron, and returned to the dining room. Table 12 was still occupied, the Jasmine Tea Man still reading, his pot of tea growing cold. "Sir," I said, approaching with my most professional smile. "I noticed your tea has gotten cold. Let me bring you a fresh pot." "That's kind of you," he replied without looking up, "but I'll be leaving soon." "Of course. Here's your bill then." I placed the check presenter on the table, and with it, my note, positioned exactly where the other one had been. I walked away before I could second-guess myself, before I could retrieve the note and throw it away and forget this moment of temporary insanity. From across the room, I watched him finally set down his book, watched his elegant fingers reach for the check presenter, watched him open it, expecting to see the bill. His entire body went still. It was subtle. Most people wouldn't have noticed. But I'd spent 8 months learning to read customers' micro-expressions, the tiny tells that indicated whether they were about to complain, to tip well, or to leave without paying. This was different. This was the stillness of a predator who'd just scented something unexpected. He read the note once, twice. Then his eyes lifted and scanned the dining room until they found me standing at the service station, pretending to organize menus. Our gazes locked, and this time there was no mistaking it. He'd seen me switch the notes. He knew. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. A calculation being made, a decision being reached. He stood smoothly, placed cash on the table, far more than the bill required, and walked toward the exit with measured steps. But as he passed the service station, he paused for just a fraction of a second. "Thank you for your concern," he said quietly, his voice pitched low enough that only I could hear. "But you shouldn't have done that." Then he was gone, disappearing into the rain-soaked night, leaving me standing there with my heart racing and the sudden, terrifying certainty that I'd just made a mistake I didn't yet understand. Manager Kim appeared at my elbow. "What did he say to you?" "Nothing," I lied smoothly. "Just thanked me for the service." But as I cleared table 12 20 minutes later, finding the generous tip he'd left, I noticed something tucked under his teacup. Another folded piece of paper. I opened it with shaking hands. In elegant handwriting, it read, "Some questions are dangerous to ask. Some kindness is dangerous to show. Go home safely tonight, Sujina, and forget this happened." He knew my name. He'd read my name tag, I realized, a detail I hadn't even registered during our brief interaction. I should have felt afraid. Should have been terrified that this mysterious man not only knew I'd switched the notes but had taken the time to write back. Instead, I felt something else entirely, like I'd just stepped off the edge of something vast and unknown, and I was still falling. The restaurant closed at midnight. I helped with the cleanup in a daze, my mind replaying every moment of the evening. As I finally walked out into the rain with my umbrella held high against the Seoul night, I had no way of knowing that by morning, everything would change. That by morning, 1,000 men would be gone. That by morning, the careful balance of Seoul's underworld would shift because of a simple note from a tired waitress who'd asked if someone was okay. I didn't sleep that night. My studio apartment in Hongdae felt smaller than usual, the walls closing in as I lay on my narrow bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling. Rain continued to hammer against my single window, creating shadows that danced across the cheap wallpaper I'd tried to cover with travel posters, places I'd never been and probably never would. The Jasmine Tea Man's final note sat on my bedside table, the paper already worn from how many times I'd unfolded and refolded it, reading those words again and again. Some questions are dangerous to ask. Some kindness is dangerous to show. What did that mean? And more importantly, why had I involved myself in something that was clearly none of my business? I knew better. I'd spent 8 months in Seoul learning to be invisible, to not draw attention, to keep my head down and my expired visa status unnoticed. Getting involved with whatever shadowy business was being conducted at that riverside restaurant was the exact opposite of survival strategy. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. Not threatening, not cold, just tired. Unbearably, profoundly tired in a way that made him seem human, despite the expensive clothes and the careful control. My phone buzzed at 3 a.m., making me jump. A text from Minji, my coworker from the morning cafe job. "Are you okay? Manager Kim called asking about you. Said something weird happened at the restaurant." My stomach dropped. Manager Kim never called employees at home, never showed interest in anything beyond whether we showed up on time and didn't steal from the register. I typed back, "Everything's fine. Just a confused customer. Nothing serious." The lie tasted bitter even through text message. Sleep finally claimed me around 4 a.m., but it was fitful, filled with fragmented dreams of folded notes and jasmine tea and dark eyes that saw too much. The alarm woke me at 6:30. I had to be at the cafe by 7:30, which meant rushing through my morning routine. Quick shower in the temperamental bathroom. Instant coffee that tasted like regret. Grabbing my umbrella because the rain hadn't stopped. The subway was packed with the early morning crowd, everyone pressed together in tired silence. I held onto the overhead bar and let my mind wander, watching Seoul flash by through dirty windows. When I emerged at Hongdae Station, something felt off. I couldn't explain it exactly. The street looked the same convenience stores, same coffee shops, same clusters of students heading to morning classes. But there was a tension in the air, like the moment before thunder. The cafe where I worked mornings was a tiny place tucked between a cosmetics shop and a phone repair store. It catered mostly to students and office workers grabbing coffee before their day began. Simple, routine, safe. Except today, Manager Park was already there when I arrived, which never happened. She usually rolled in around 8:30, leaving me to handle the opening rush alone. "Sujin, she said the moment I walked through the door, her expression tight with something I couldn't read. "We need to talk." My heart sank. Is something wrong? Close the door. I did, my hands suddenly cold despite the warm cafe interior. Manager Park was in her 50s, a no-nonsense woman who'd hired me despite my obvious foreigner status and questionable documentation because I worked hard and didn't cause problems. We'd never had what you'd call a personal conversation in the 4 months I'd been there. "Someone came by last night," she said, her voice careful. "After closing. Asked about you." The world tilted slightly. "What? Who?" He didn't give a name. Just showed me a photo on his phone. Your photo. And asked if you worked here, what hours, how long you'd been employed. She studied my face intently. "Sujin, what kind of trouble are you in?" "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "I mean, I'm not in trouble. At least I don't think I am." That sounded unconvincing even to my own ears. "He left money," Manager Park continued, pulling an envelope from her apron pocket. "A lot of money. Said it was advance payment for your shifts this month, and that I shouldn't worry if you needed time off." She handed me the envelope. I opened it with trembling fingers and immediately closed it again. There had to be at least 3,000,001 inside, more than I made in 6 months, at both jobs combined. "Who are you involved with?" Manager Park asked quietly. "Because men who carry that kind of cash and ask questions at midnight aren't the kind you want in your life." "I don't know him," I said. And it was technically true. I didn't know the Jasmine Tea Man. Didn't know his name, his life, anything beyond the fact that he drank jasmine tea and read books and somehow commanded enough respect or fear that people left coded messages for him, and that in one brief moment of eye contact, I'd seen something in him that made me forget to be careful. Manager Park sighed. "I can't tell you what to do with your life, Sujina. But I've lived in Seoul long enough to recognize when someone has caught the attention of people who operate in shadows. Whatever this is, be careful. Very careful." The morning shift was a blur. I went through the motions, taking orders, making coffee, cleaning tables. But my mind was elsewhere. The envelope of money felt like it was burning through my apron pocket. Why would he do this? We'd exchanged maybe 10 words total. I'd switched a note, a stupid, impulsive act that should have warranted anger, not whatever this was. My phone buzzed during my break. Unknown number. The text was brief. "The Riverside restaurant is closed today. Don't go there for your evening shift. Stay home. You're safe." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Who is this?" The response came immediately. "Someone who received an unexpected kindness and wants to return it. Stay home tonight, Sujina." The use of my name sent a shiver down my spine. Not fear exactly, but something close to it. I worked until 3 p.m., then took the subway back to Hongdae in a daze. The rain had finally stopped, leaving Seoul wet and gleaming under afternoon sunlight that felt wrong somehow. Too bright, too normal for whatever was happening. When I reached my apartment building, a black car was parked outside. Not unusual. This was Seoul. Black cars were everywhere. But this one had tinted windows and a particular stillness that made me pause. The back window rolled down as I approached, and a woman's face appeared. She was probably in her 40s, elegant in a way that spoke of money and power, her hair styled in a perfect bob, her makeup flawless. "Sujin-si," she said in Korean that was too perfect, too cultured. "Would you mind joining me for a moment?" Everything in my body screamed to run. But I was also aware that running would only delay whatever this was, not prevent it. I got into the car. The interior smelled like leather and expensive perfume. The woman sat with perfect posture, studying me with eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. "My name is Choi Yuna," she said. "I work for someone you met last night." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do." She smiled, and it was almost kind. "You gave him a note, asked if he was okay. Do you know how many people have dared to ask Jae-min that question in the last 15 years? Jae-min. So that was his name. None, Choi Yuna continued when I didn't respond. The answer is none. People don't question him. They don't express concern. They certainly don't switch notes that were meant for him with their own messages. I didn't mean... I know what you meant, she interrupted gently. You saw someone who looked tired and wanted to be kind. It was remarkably foolish. It was also remarkably brave. I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified and confused and deeply out of my depth. The note you intercepted, Choi Yuna said, her voice lowering, contained information about a shipment scheduled for tonight. Information that would have led Jae-min into a trap designed to eliminate him and 3 of his key advisors. My blood ran cold. I didn't know. Of course you didn't. But your impulsive kindness saved his life. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a tablet, opening it to show me a news article. Have you seen the morning news? I shook my head. The headline read, Mass Exodus in Seoul's Underground. Hundreds of workers disappear overnight. Below it, the article detailed how numerous businesses throughout Seoul had opened that morning to find their staff simply gone. Delivery drivers, warehouse workers, security personnel, nearly 1,000 people total had vanished without warning or explanation. What does this have to do with... Everything, Choi Yuna said. When Jae-min realized the note had been switched, he understood immediately what had happened. He knew the trap that had been set for him, and he responded. She scrolled through the article, showing photos of abandoned warehouses, empty security booths, delivery trucks sitting unmoved in parking lots. In 8 hours, he dismantled the infrastructure of his rival's organization. Every person on the payroll was given a choice: leave Seoul permanently with compensation, or face consequences. Most chose to leave. I felt sick. You're telling me that because I switched a note, 1,000 people lost their jobs? I'm telling you that because you switched a note, a war was prevented. Those people are alive and compensated. Had the trap succeeded, the violence would have consumed hundreds more, including many innocent bystanders. She closed the tablet. You did that. Your small act of misplaced kindness created a cascade you couldn't possibly have predicted. I didn't mean to cause any of this. Intent rarely matters in our world, Choi Yuna said. Only consequences. And the consequence of your action is that you've caught Jaemin's attention. More than that, you've earned his gratitude. Do you understand how rare that is? I didn't want to understand, didn't want any part of this. He wants to meet with you properly, she continued. Not at the restaurant where you're working to survive on an expired visa, not in the shadows where you've been forced to exist. He wants to offer you something. What? A choice. She smiled again, and this time it was genuine. The first real choice you've had in months, I suspect. But he wants you to come willingly. No pressure, no threats, just an invitation. She handed me a card, thick, expensive paper, with an address embossed in silver. Tomorrow evening, 7 p.m. If you come, you'll hear his offer. If you don't, the money left at your cafe will ensure you can survive for a while, and we'll never contact you again. She reached for the door handle. Either way, Sujinsi, you should know. Your small kindness reminded someone very powerful what it feels like to be human. That's no small thing. I got out of the car in a daze, the card clutched in my hand. As the vehicle pulled away, I stood on my street in the afternoon sunlight, trying to process what had just happened. 1,000 men gone. An underground war prevented, all because I'd written a simple note asking if someone was okay. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, each step feeling heavier than the last. Inside, I placed the card on my kitchen counter and stared at it for a long time. Tomorrow evening, 7 p.m. A choice. But as I looked around my tiny apartment, the water damage, the peeling wallpaper, the constant precariousness of my existence here, I wondered if I'd ever really had a choice at all. Maybe that's what he understood. Maybe that's why he'd sent Choi Yuna instead of coming himself. Because freedom without options isn't really freedom. And a choice that's offered when you're desperate isn't really a choice. But it was more than I'd had yesterday. I called in sick to both jobs the next day. It was the first time I'd done so in 8 months of working 7 days a week, and the guilt sat heavy in my chest. But I couldn't face Manager Park's concerned questions or Manager Kim's suspicious glances. Not while I was trying to decide whether to meet a man who apparently commanded enough power to make 1,000 people vanish overnight. I spent the morning cleaning my apartment, a nervous habit I'd developed over the years, scrubbing the mildew from the bathroom corners, wiping down surfaces that were already clean, organizing the handful of belongings I'd brought to Seoul. My phone buzzed around noon. Minji. Manager Park is worried. Are you actually sick or hiding from something? I typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on. Just needed a day. I'm fine. Another lie. I was collecting them like debts. The card sat on my kitchen counter where I'd left it, the address seeming to pulse with significance. I'd looked it up that morning. A building in Gangnam, one of Seoul's wealthiest districts. The kind of place I'd only ever seen from subway windows. At 4 p.m., I started getting ready, moving on autopilot. Shower, makeup, the nicest dress I owned, a simple black thing I'd bought secondhand for a friend's wedding back home. It felt inadequate for wherever I was going, but it was all I had. I did my hair carefully, pinning it back in a way that made me look older, more put together than I felt. Stared at my reflection and tried to see what Jaemin had seen that night at the restaurant. Just a tired waitress with an expired visa and too many jobs. Nothing special. Nothing worth reorganizing an underworld for. But he'd written back. Had left money at my cafe. Had sent his elegant associate to deliver an invitation instead of a threat. Why? At 6:30, I left my apartment, the card and my phone the only things in my small purse. The subway ride to Gangnam felt longer than usual, each stop giving me time to second-guess this decision. I could just not show up. Could take the money he'd left and disappear into Seoul's vast anonymity. Find new jobs, a new apartment, restart the precarious life I'd been building. But I was tired of running, tired of being invisible. And beneath the fear, there was something else. Curiosity, maybe, or the reckless part of me that had prompted that note in the first place. The building was exactly as intimidating as I'd imagined. Glass and steel reaching toward the evening sky, doormen in uniforms, a lobby that looked like a museum. I felt completely out of place. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked in Korean, her tone professionally polite, but her eyes assessing my secondhand dress and my obviously foreign features. I handed her the card wordlessly. Her expression changed instantly, from polite dismissal to careful respect. "Of course. Please follow me." She led me to a private elevator, using a key card to access it. The doors closed on just the two of us, and we ascended in silence. "He's on the penthouse level," she said as we rose. "Ms. Choi is waiting for you." The elevator opened onto a hallway that was more artwork than functional space. Original paintings on the walls, sculptures on pedestals, lighting that seemed designed to make everything glow. Choi Yuna stood at the end of the hall, wearing a different but equally elegant suit. She smiled when she saw me. "You came. I wasn't certain you would." "I'm not certain I should have," I admitted. "Honesty. That's good." She gestured for me to follow her. Jaemin appreciates honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. She led me through massive double doors into an apartment that took my breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Seoul's glittering skyline. The interior was minimalist but clearly expensive. Everything chosen with careful intent, nothing excessive or showy. And there, standing by the windows with his back to us, was Jaemin. He wore casual clothes, dark slacks, and a charcoal sweater similar to what he'd worn at the restaurant. His hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. He held a glass of something amber that caught the evening light. "Soo Jin-si has arrived," Choi Yuna announced softly. He turned, and seeing him in this context, his space, his territory, I finally understood what I'd missed at the restaurant. This wasn't just a wealthy man. This was someone who'd built an empire on careful control and calculated decisions, and I'd disrupted that with a stupid note. "Thank you, Yuna," he said, his voice the same quiet depth I remembered. "You can leave us." "Are you certain?" "I'm certain." Choi Yuna hesitated for just a moment, then bowed slightly and left, the doors closing with a soft click that seemed very loud in the sudden silence. Jaemin studied me for a long moment, and I forced myself not to look away. I'd come here willingly. The least I could do was meet his eyes. "Would you like something to drink?" he finally asked. "Tea, perhaps. I have jasmine." The hint of humor in his tone surprised me. "I'm fine, thank you." "You're nervous." "Wouldn't you be?" I countered before I could stop myself. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his face completely. "Yes, I think I would be." He gestured to the seating area. "Please sit. I promise this isn't an interrogation." I sat on the edge of a sofa that probably cost more than a year of my rent, my back straight, hands folded in my lap. Jaemin took the chair across from me, maintaining a careful distance. He sipped his drink. Whiskey, I realized, and seemed to be considering his words. "I should start by apologizing," he said finally, "for frightening you, for disrupting your life, for the money left at your cafe, which probably felt like a threat rather than a gift." "Was it a threat?" "No." He met my eyes directly. "It was gratitude and guilt in equal measure. Gratitude that you saved my life, even unintentionally. Guilt that your act of kindness pulled you into my world when you'd clearly worked hard to stay invisible." The accuracy of that observation stung. "How much do you know about me?" "Everything there is to know." He said it without apology. Your name is Choi Soo-jin. You're 24 years old, originally from Busan, but raised in America after your family emigrated when you were 8. You returned to Korea 18 months ago after your mother became ill. She passed away 7 months ago. My throat tightened. Your visa expired 3 months later. But you stayed because going back to America meant leaving behind the last place your mother knew. You work 2 jobs, neither legally, and you sent half your earnings to your younger sister who's still in college in Los Angeles. He paused. You also volunteer at a free clinic in Itaewon on Sunday mornings, teaching English to immigrant workers. I hadn't told anyone about that. Hadn't wanted my coworkers knowing how I spent my one morning off. I'm sorry about your mother, he continued softly. Cancer is cruel. She was too young. How do you... I make it my business to know things about people who enter my life, Jamin said. Especially people who show me unexpected kindness. It's how I survive. Is that why you had 1,000 people leave Seoul? Survival? Yes. He didn't flinch from the question. The note you intercepted was from a rival organization. They'd arranged for me to be at the pier at midnight, ostensibly for a negotiation. In reality, there would have been 15 armed men waiting. So you destroyed their infrastructure instead. I removed their ability to execute the plan, he corrected. Everyone who left was compensated generously and given safe passage. No one was harmed. That's important to me, minimizing harm. You run a criminal organization, I said flatly. Don't pretend that's victimless. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Appreciation, maybe. You're right. The organization I inherited from my father deals in things that exist in gray areas of the law. Protection services, information brokerage, conflict resolution for people who can't go to the police. That sounds like a euphemism for... It is, he interrupted. I won't insult your intelligence by pretending otherwise, but I also won't apologize for the life I was born into. I can only control how I conduct myself within it. He finished his whiskey and set the glass down with a soft clink. Which brings us to why you're here, he continued. You asked in your note if I was okay. If anyone had bothered to ask. The answer is no. No one asks. No one dares. And I realized in that moment that I couldn't remember the last time someone had seen me as simply human, rather than as the head of an organization. I didn't mean... I know what you meant. That's what made it powerful. He leaned forward slightly, his attention completely focused on me. You saw someone who looked tired and wanted to help. No agenda, no fear, just simple human kindness. Do you know how rare that is in my world? I'm starting to understand, I admitted quietly. I want to offer you something, Jamin said. Not payment for what you did, that would cheapen it, but an opportunity, a choice you don't currently have. Here it came, the real reason for this meeting. Your visa is expired. You're working illegally, 1 complaint away from deportation. You're exhausted from 2 jobs that barely cover rent and your sister's tuition. And you're brilliant. Your manager at the cafe mentioned you learned conversational Korean in less than 6 months, and you're teaching English on volunteer time despite everything else. He paused. That's not sustainable. What are you offering? Legal residency, he said simply. Proper documentation that will allow you to work legitimately. A job at one of my legitimate businesses. And yes, I do have several. Salary sufficient to support yourself and help your sister without working yourself to death. It sounded too good, which meant it wasn't. In exchange for what? Honesty, he said. The kind of honesty that made you write that note. I'm surrounded by people who tell me what they think I want to hear. By associates who fear me, by rivals who hate me, by family who use me. I've forgotten what it feels like to have someone simply tell me the truth. You want to hire me to be honest with you? I want to hire you to be yourself, he corrected. To work at one of my companies, a legitimate art gallery in Samcheongdong that needs a coordinator. To occasionally have dinner with me and tell me when I'm being an idiot. To exist in my life as someone who sees me as human, rather than as a means to an end. I stared at him, trying to process the surreal nature of this offer. This is insane, I said finally. Yes, he smiled slightly. It probably is, but I find I don't care. You reminded me that I'm more than what I do, more than the role I play. And I want to keep that feeling. What if I say no? Then nothing changes for you. The money at your cafe is yours regardless. I'll ensure your visa situation is resolved quietly, and we'll never meet again. His expression grew serious. But I hope you'll say yes. Not because of the practical benefits, though those are real, but because I think you're tired of being invisible too. That hit harder than anything else he'd said. I looked out at Seoul's skyline, the city where I'd been struggling to survive for months. Thought about my tiny apartment, my aching feet, the constant fear of deportation. Thought about my mother's dream for me, a good life, stability, happiness. And I thought about the exhaustion in Jaemin's eyes that night at the restaurant, the way he'd looked when he'd read my note, the transformation in his expression, like remembering something precious he'd forgotten existed. I need time to think, I said finally. Of course. Take as long as you need. He stood, and I did the same. Yuna will drive you home. If you decide yes, call the number on that card. If you decide no, destroy the card and forget we ever met. I nodded, suddenly desperate to be away from this apartment, from his penetrating gaze, from the impossible choice he'd laid before me. At the door, I turned back. That night at the restaurant, I said. Were you really tired? Or was I just projecting? Jaemin met my eyes, and for just a moment, the careful control dropped away completely. I was exhausted, he admitted quietly. I am exhausted. Every single day. And no one's asked if I'm okay in 15 years. Until you. The elevator ride down felt like descending from a dream into reality. Choi Yuna waited in the lobby with her perfect composure and knowing smile. He likes you, she said as we walked to the car. Genuinely likes you. That's remarkable. I don't understand any of this. You don't need to understand, she replied. You just need to decide what you want. For once in your life, Sujin-si, you get to choose. That night, I lay in my narrow bed staring at the card, unable to sleep. A choice, legal residency, a real job, financial stability, the ability to help my sister without killing myself in the process. And all I had to do was exist in the life of a man whose world had just revealed itself to be far more complicated and far more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. But I kept thinking about that moment of recognition at the restaurant. The exhaustion in his eyes. The way he'd written back, taking time to warn me when he could have simply ignored my note. You reminded someone very powerful what it feels like to be human. Maybe that mattered. Maybe that was worth the risk. Or maybe I was just tired of being invisible. I didn't call the number on the card. Instead, I showed up at the Riverside restaurant 3 days later for my usual evening shift, half expecting to find it still closed, half hoping this would all turn out to be some elaborate fever dream. The restaurant was open. Manager Kim greeted me with his usual indifference. The kitchen staff argued in their typical fashion. Everything appeared normal, as if the world hadn't tilted sideways. Except table 12 was occupied. Jaemin sat in his corner booth reading a different book, something with a red cover this time. A pot of jasmine tea steamed beside him. He was wearing a navy sweater and looked exactly as he had the first night I'd noticed him, before everything had become complicated. He glanced up when I entered, our eyes meeting across the dining room. He didn't smile, didn't acknowledge me beyond that brief moment of recognition. Just returned to his book, as if I were any other waitress in any other restaurant. I tied my apron with shaking hands. "Table 12 needs water," Manager Kim said without looking up. "Of course." I filled a glass at the service station, my mind racing. What was he doing here? Was this a test? A statement? As I approached his table, he set down his book with careful precision. "Good evening," he said in Korean, his tone perfectly polite, perfectly appropriate for the setting. "Good evening, sir. Can I get you anything besides the tea?" "Not tonight, but I was wondering—" He paused, as if considering his words. "If you'd had time to think about our previous conversation." So he was being direct. No pretense, no games. "I don't know what I'm thinking," I admitted quietly, aware that we were in public, that Manager Kim was watching from across the room. This is all very confusing. Life often is. He picked up his teacup, studying the amber liquid inside. But confusion is just the mind's way of processing new possibilities. The real question is whether those possibilities interest you. You're asking if I'm interested in working for a criminal organization. I'm asking if you're interested in being seen, he corrected softly. The job is incidental. The residency is practical. But the core of what I'm offering is the chance to stop being invisible, to exist fully in a city that's forced you into shadows. A customer at another table signaled for service. I had to go, had to maintain the illusion of normalcy. "I'll think about it," I said, and moved away before he could respond. The evening passed with surreal normalcy. I took orders, served food, cleared tables. Jaemin remained in his corner booth, reading, and occasionally sipping tea. To anyone watching, we were simply waitress and customer. Nothing more, nothing less. But I felt the weight of his presence. Felt the unasked question hanging between us. Around 9 p.m., the restaurant began to empty. Manager Kim disappeared into his office for the nightly accounting. I was wiping down tables when Jaemin finally closed his book. "Sujin-si?" he called softly. I approached with my cleaning cloth still in hand, suddenly aware of how exhausted I looked. Hair escaping its ponytail, uniform stained with food, dark circles under my eyes from too many shifts, and not enough sleep. "Yes, sir. I want to show you something." He pulled out his phone, turning it so I could see the screen. "This is the gallery I mentioned. Samcheongdong." The image showed a beautiful space. High ceilings, white walls, natural light streaming through large windows. Art displayed with careful curation, each piece given room to breathe. "It's lovely," I admitted. "The current coordinator is retiring next month. She's been there 15 years and wants to ensure her replacement actually cares about art, not just the business of selling it." He scrolled to another image, a small office with a desk overlooking a courtyard garden. "This would be your space, quiet, private, a place to think." It looked like a dream. Like the kind of place my mother had hoped I'd work someday. Professional, respectable, creative. "Why me?" I asked suddenly. "You could hire anyone. Someone with proper credentials, experience, legal residency already established." "I could," he agreed, "but they wouldn't be you." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I have." He stood, pulling out his wallet to pay for the tea he'd barely touched. "I spent 15 years building walls around myself, Sujin-si. Necessary walls for survival in my world. And then you asked if I was okay. And suddenly those walls felt suffocating rather than protective." He placed money on the table, again, far more than the bill required. "I'm not offering you a fairy tale," he continued. "My life is complicated, dangerous sometimes. There will be aspects you'll find difficult to reconcile. But I'm offering you honesty, and the chance to build something real in a city that's given you very little that's real so far. I need more time. I know. He slipped his book into his bag. Take all the time you need. I'll be here every Tuesday and Thursday evening at 7 p.m. When you're ready to talk, I'll be at this table. No pressure, no deadline. Just possibility. He left then, disappearing into the soul night, leaving me standing there with my cleaning cloth and my racing thoughts. The next Tuesday, he was there. Same table, same tea, different book. I served him wordlessly, and he accepted the service with equal silence. We existed in parallel, close but not touching, aware but not acknowledging. Thursday, the same. Tuesday again. It became a routine. He would sit, I would serve. We would exchange nothing beyond professional pleasantries. But every week, he left an amount that made my tips for the evening more than I'd make in a regular week at both jobs. I should have found it manipulative. Should have resented the implication that I could be bought. Instead, I found myself looking forward to those evenings. Found myself noticing things about him I'd missed before. The way he always chose books about philosophy or history, never fiction. How he took his tea without sugar, drinking it slowly as if the ritual mattered more than the beverage. The small scar above his eyebrow that became more visible when he frowned in concentration. And I noticed the exhaustion. It was always there, a weight he carried like a second skin. Some evenings it seemed lighter. Those were the nights when he'd smile slightly as I refilled his teapot. Other evenings it looked crushing. Those nights, his shoulders would be tense, his jaw tight, his eyes distant. On one such evening, 3 weeks after our conversation in his apartment, I set down his tea and couldn't stop myself. "Bad day?" I asked quietly in English. His eyes snapped to mine, surprised. We'd been maintaining the Korean formality, the professional distance. "You could say that," he replied in the same language, his accent barely noticeable. "Lost a business partner to retirement. Good for him, difficult for me." "Will you replace him?" "Eventually, but replacing someone loyal and trustworthy is never easy." He gestured to the seat across from him. "Do you have a moment?" I glanced around. The restaurant was quiet. Manager Kim absorbed in his accounting. I sat, feeling like I was crossing an invisible line. "I want to tell you something," Jaemin said, "about my father." I hadn't expected this. Personal history was dangerous territory. "My father built this organization from nothing," he continued. "Came to Seoul with nothing but determination and willingness to do what others wouldn't. By the time I was born, he controlled a significant portion of the city's underground economy. He traced the rim of his teacup with one finger, a nervous gesture that seemed out of character. He was brilliant, ruthless when necessary, but never cruel. He had a code, rules about who could be targeted, what methods were acceptable, lines he wouldn't cross." Jaemin paused. I thought that code made him weak. Thought his principles were obstacles to greater power. "What changed your mind?" "He died when I was 22. Lung cancer, sudden and aggressive. And I inherited everything. The organization, the responsibilities, the enemies." His voice dropped. "And I learned that his code wasn't weakness. It was the only thing preventing me from becoming a monster." I didn't know what to say to that. Didn't have platitudes that would feel appropriate. "I've done things I'm not proud of," he said quietly. "Made choices that haunt me. But I've tried to maintain his principles. To be ruthless only when necessary. To minimize harm. To remember that power without purpose is just destruction." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because if you agree to work for me, to exist in my life, you deserve to know who I am. Not the sanitized version, not the careful image I present to the world. The truth. He met my eyes directly, and I saw something in his expression that made my chest ache. Vulnerability, carefully controlled but undeniably present. "I'm not a good man," Jamin said, "but I'm trying not to be a terrible one. And your note reminded me why that matters. Why maintaining humanity in an inhuman world is worth the effort." Manager Kim emerged from his office, and I stood quickly, the moment of intimacy breaking like glass. "I should get back to work." "Of course." Jamin pulled out his book again, but I noticed his hands weren't quite steady. "Thank you for sitting with me." That night, I lay awake thinking about his words, about codes and principles and the space between good and terrible, about a young man who'd inherited a criminal empire and was trying to run it with something resembling ethics. It shouldn't have mattered. His attempts at being not terrible didn't erase the fundamental nature of what he did. But I kept thinking about his exhaustion, about how he'd described the loneliness of being surrounded by people who saw him only as a means to an end. I thought about my own loneliness, about months of being invisible, of surviving rather than living, of measuring my worth in the number of shifts I could work without collapsing. Maybe we weren't so different. Maybe we were both exhausted people trying to be something better than circumstances had made us. The next Thursday, I arrived at the restaurant to find table 12 empty. Manager Kim was visibly agitated. The regular customer called, said he won't be coming tonight, some emergency. I felt a stab of disappointment that I had no right to feel. Did he say when he'd be back? No, just that he'd call if circumstances changed. Manager Kim studied me with narrowed eyes. "Why do you care? He's just a customer." "He tips well," I said, which was true, if incomplete. The evening dragged. I kept glancing at table 12, expecting to see him materialize with his book and his tea. The absence felt wrong, like missing a stare in the dark. At closing time, as I was preparing to leave, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. "I'm sorry I couldn't be there tonight. Something came up that required immediate attention. Are you working tomorrow?" I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. This was it. The moment of decision. I could ignore the text, ignore the implicit question. Could continue in my precarious existence, invisible and exhausted but safe in obscurity. Or I could take the risk, could step into the light and see what happened. My mother's voice echoed in my memory. One of the last things she'd said before the morphine had stolen her words. "Don't live small, Sujina. Don't let fear make you invisible. I didn't bring you into this world to watch you disappear from it." I typed before I could overthink it. "I'm off tomorrow. We should talk." The response came immediately. "Thank you. I'll send a car at noon." I closed my phone, my heart pounding. Tomorrow everything would change. I could feel it. The question was whether I was ready for that change, or if anyone ever really was ready for the moment their life pivoted toward the unknown. The car arrived precisely at noon. Not the black vehicle with tinted windows that Choi Yuna had used. This was different. A modest sedan, dark blue, driven by a woman in her 30s who introduced herself simply as Minseo. "Jamin sends his apologies for the inconvenience," she said in pleasant Korean as I buckled my seatbelt. "He wanted to meet you at a location that felt less overwhelming than his apartment." "Where are we going?" "You'll see." We drove north through Seoul, away from the dense urban center toward neighborhoods I'd never visited. The buildings grew sparser. Green spaces appeared between structures, and eventually, we turned onto a private road that wound up a hillside. The house, I couldn't call it anything else, sat at the top of the hill, surrounded by gardens that were clearly maintained with care. Traditional Korean architecture mixed seamlessly with modern elements. It was beautiful in a way that felt almost peaceful, so different from the glass and steel of Gangnam. Jae-min waited on the porch, wearing casual clothes, jeans and a simple white shirt, looking more human than I'd ever seen him. He descended the steps as Mincio parked and opened my door with a slight bow. "Thank you for coming." "This is yours?" I asked, stepping out and taking in the property. "My mother's, actually. But she lives in Jeju now, so I use it when I need to remember what quiet feels like." He gestured toward the house. "Would you like tea? I've prepared lunch, nothing elaborate, just some banchan and rice." "You cook?" A faint smile. "I've lived alone for 10 years. One learns." The interior was as unexpected as the exterior. Traditional furnishings mixed with comfortable modern pieces. Books lined every available wall. Large windows overlooked the gardens, and beyond them, a view of Seoul in the distance that looked almost abstract from this height. "I brought you here because I wanted to have an honest conversation," Jaemin said, as he led me to a low table in the main room. "Not in my territory where you feel intimidated, not at the restaurant where we have to pretend, just two people talking." We sat on cushions, and he poured tea, jasmine, of course, with practiced ease. "The emergency yesterday," he began without preamble, "was a confrontation with the organization that tried to set the trap. We reached an understanding, but it required my presence and certain assurances. Was anyone hurt? No, but it was close. That's the reality of my life, Sujin-si. Situations escalate quickly. Violence is sometimes unavoidable despite my best efforts to minimize it. You're warning me. I'm being honest with you. If you choose to accept my offer, there will be moments like yesterday, evenings when I have to cancel plans because someone decided to test my boundaries, periods when security around you will need to increase because being associated with me makes you a potential target." He pulled a folder from beneath the table and opened it, spreading out documents. "This is the employment contract for the gallery position. Legal, reviewed by 3 different law firms. Salary, benefits, vacation time, all standard. The residency documentation is here as well. I have lawyers who specialize in immigration cases. Your situation isn't unique, and they know how to resolve it legally." I picked up the contract, scanning the terms. The salary was more than both my current jobs combined. The benefits were generous. Everything was exactly as he'd described in his apartment. Legitimate, professional, real. And this? I touched a separate document. A non-disclosure agreement, standard for anyone who works for my legitimate businesses and knows about my other activities. It protects both of us. I looked up at him. What exactly would I be agreeing not to disclose? That you know who I am beyond the gallery owner, that you're aware of my organization's existence, that you have access to information that could be valuable to law enforcement or my rivals. He met my eyes steadily. I won't ask you to lie if directly questioned by authorities, but I need your word that you won't volunteer information. That's not negotiable. So I'd be complicit. In knowing? Yes. In activities? No. The gallery is completely separate from my other business. You'd never be asked to participate in anything illegal, but you would know, and knowing carries responsibility. I set down the contract, my hand steady despite the enormousness of what we were discussing. Why is this so important to you? Why not just hire someone who's already in your world, who already understands the rules? Jaemin was quiet for a long moment, staring into his teacup as if it held answers. When I was 25, he finally said, I was engaged to be married. Her name was Haewon. She was beautiful, intelligent, from a good family that understood my world. Everyone said we were perfect together. Past tense, I noted that immediately. 2 weeks before the wedding, she came to me and said she couldn't do it. Not because she didn't care about me, but because she realized she'd never actually seen me. Just the role I played. The heir, the leader, the power she could access through me. She said she'd looked across the breakfast table that morning and realized she had no idea who I actually was as a person. His voice remained steady, but I could hear the old pain underneath. She was right. I'd never let her see me. Never trusted her with the human parts, the doubts, the exhaustion, the moments when I questioned everything. I'd given her the performance, not the person. And when she left, I realized I'd become exactly what my world required. All function, no humanity. So I remind you that you're human. You saw me as human first, he corrected, before you knew anything else about me. That note you wrote, it wasn't addressed to Jaemin, the crime boss, or Jaemin, the wealthy benefactor. It was addressed to someone who looked tired, someone you thought might need kindness. He leaned forward slightly, his intensity focused entirely on me. I'm not asking you to save me, Sujin-si. I'm not asking you to fix me or redeem me or whatever romantic notion might be floating around. I'm asking if you want the opportunity to live openly, with legal security and financial stability, while occasionally reminding me that I'm more than what I do. That's all. That's all? I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. That's everything, he said quietly. To someone who's forgotten what it feels like to be simply human, that's everything. I looked around the room, the books, the comfortable furniture, the carefully maintained space that felt like a sanctuary from the violence and calculation of his other life. This was his refuge. And he'd brought me here, into this private space, to have this conversation. I'm scared, I admitted. Good. You should be. This isn't a small decision. But I'm also tired. So tired of barely surviving, of being invisible, of measuring every choice against whether it might get me deported. I met his eyes. You're offering me a chance to stop being scared about basic survival, to have breathing room. That's powerful. It's practical. But I want you to understand, this isn't charity. I need what you're offering too. That honesty, that ability to see me as human. It's not one-sided. I picked up the contract again, reading through it more carefully. The terms were exactly as he'd described. Clear, fair, legal. The non-disclosure agreement was specific about what it covered and what it didn't. If I sign this, I said slowly, and I start working at the gallery, what happens when you have a bad day like yesterday? Do I just pretend I don't know? You live your life, work at the gallery, coordinate exhibits, interact with artists and collectors, and occasionally, if you're willing, you might have dinner with me and tell me when I'm being an insufferable idiot. He smiled slightly. Yuna does that sometimes, but she's my employee. It's different when someone chooses to be honest rather than being paid to be. Just dinner and honesty? Just that. I'm not asking for anything romantic or complicated. I have no expectations beyond what we've discussed. He paused. Though, I hope we might become something resembling friends. I have very few of those. I thought about my mother again. About her insistence that I live fully, that I not let circumstances make me small. I thought about the past 8 months, the exhaustion, the fear, the constant precariousness of my existence and soul. And I thought about Jaemin's tired eyes, and how something in them had shifted when he'd read my note. How he'd described feeling human again for the first time in years. Maybe we both needed this. Maybe that was okay. I want to see the gallery first, I said. Before I decide, I need to see if it's real. The job, the space, everything you've described. Of course, Minseo can drive us there now if you'd like. We didn't finish lunch. Within 15 minutes, we were back in the car, driving toward Samcheongdong. Jaemin sat beside me in the back seat, close enough that I could smell his cologne, subtle and expensive, but maintaining a careful distance that felt respectful. The gallery was exactly as beautiful as the photos had suggested. The owner, Soon-hee, an elegant woman in her 60s, greeted us warmly. "So you're the one Jaemin's been telling me about," she said, studying me with sharp but kind eyes. "He says you have a genuine love for art, that you've been teaching yourself Korean art history in your free time." I glanced at Jaemin, surprised. I had been doing that, visiting museums on my rare days off, reading whatever I could find online, but I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. "He's very thorough," I said carefully. "He is, which is why I trust his judgment." She gestured around the gallery. "This place has been my life's work. 15 years building relationships with artists, creating a space where their work can be properly appreciated. I won't hand it over to just anyone." She showed us around, the main gallery space with its perfect lighting, the smaller rooms for more intimate exhibitions, the storage area where pieces were carefully catalogued and preserved, and finally, the office. It was perfect. A small space with a desk positioned to look out at the courtyard garden, shelves for books and catalogs, a comfortable chair that looked actually used rather than decorative. Someone had loved this space, had made it their own. "Could you be happy here?" Jaemin asked quietly as Soon-hee stepped away to take a phone call. I ran my hand along the desk, feeling the smooth wood. Through the window I could see cherry blossoms beginning to bloom in the courtyard. "Yes," I admitted. "I could be very happy here." "Then say yes. Sign the contract. Let me help you build a legal life in Seoul. Let yourself stop running." I turned to face him. This man who'd reorganized an underworld because of my stupid note, who'd offered me safety and opportunity in exchange for simple honesty. "If I do this," I said, "I need one promise from you. Name it. Don't lie to me, ever. I don't need to know everything about your business, but if I ask you a direct question, I need the truth, no matter how uncomfortable." He considered this, his expression serious. "That could be difficult sometimes. There may be things that are dangerous for you to know." "Then tell me that. Tell me it's dangerous and you can't answer. But don't lie." "Agreed." He held out his hand. "Do we have a deal?" I looked at his outstretched hand, thinking about all the moments that had led to this. A chance encounter in a bathroom I'd walked into by mistake. A note written on impulse. A choice that was probably reckless, but felt necessary. I took his hand. "We have a deal." His fingers closed around mine, warm and sure, and something in his expression shifted. Relief, maybe, or hope. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for taking the risk, for giving me a chance to remember what it feels like to be human." "Thank you," I replied, "for seeing me when I'd gotten used to being invisible." Soon-hee returned then, smiling at our joined hands. "Well, have you made a decision?" "She has," Jaemin said, releasing my hand. "If you'll still have her." "If I'll—" Soon-hee laughed. "My dear, I've been hoping for a yes since Jaemin first mentioned you. When can you start?" "I need to give notice at my current jobs." 2 weeks then, Jaemin said. "That gives us time to process your residency documentation and for Soon-hee to show you everything you'll need to know." Everything moved quickly after that. We returned to the car with signed contracts, plans for training, a future that suddenly felt real. As Minseo drove me back to my apartment, Jaemin turned to me. "Tuesday evening," he said. "Would you have dinner with me? Not at the restaurant. Somewhere quiet where we can talk without pretending to be waitress and customer." "As friends?" I asked. "As two people figuring out what honest friendship looks like when one of them runs a criminal organization and the other saves lives with stupid notes." I smiled, surprising myself. "Okay. Yes, dinner sounds good." When I finally got home that evening, I sat in my tiny apartment and looked around. In 2 weeks, I wouldn't need this precarious existence anymore. Wouldn't need to work 7 days a week, or worry about visa status or count every one. I'd have a real job, legal residency, breathing room, and I'd have something else, connection. The kind that comes from seeing and being seen, from honesty in a world that usually trades in careful deception. My phone buzzed. A text from Jae-min. "Thank you for trusting me. I won't waste it." I typed back, "Thank you for the chance. I won't either." And somewhere in Seoul's glittering sprawl, a man who'd forgotten what humanity felt like sat in his mother's quiet house and smiled, holding a note that had changed everything, written by a waitress who dared to ask if he was okay. The 2 weeks passed like a dream I was afraid to wake from. I gave notice at both jobs. Manager Park hugged me when I told her about the gallery position, her eyes bright with vicarious happiness. "I knew you were meant for better things," she said. "Now go be brilliant." Manager Kim was less enthusiastic, but clearly unsurprised. The regular customer arranged this, didn't he? At my hesitation, he waved me off. "Don't answer. Just be careful, Sujina. Men like that are complicated." "I know." The residency paperwork moved through channels with impossible speed. Jaemin's lawyers were efficient and discreet. Within 10 days, I had legal status. No more looking over my shoulder, no more fear of deportation. Soon he trained me with patient thoroughness. She introduced me to the artists whose work filled the gallery, taught me the business side of art sales, showed me the careful dance between commercial viability and artistic integrity. "This gallery has always been about giving voice to artists who deserve recognition," she said one afternoon as we catalogued new pieces. "Never forget that. The money is necessary, but secondary. The art is why we're here." I understood. For the first time in months, I was doing work that felt meaningful rather than just surviving. But throughout all of this, Jae-min was present, never intrusive, never demanding, but there. He'd text occasionally, asking how training was going, if I needed anything, simple messages that somehow made me feel less alone. And on Tuesday evening, we had our promised dinner. He chose a small restaurant in Bukchon, the kind of place tourists never found. Traditional Korean food served in a space so intimate, it felt like dining in someone's home. "I wanted somewhere we could talk without being watched," he explained as we settled at a low table. "Somewhere honest." Does such a place exist in your life? Almost never. That's why I value it when I find it. We talked for hours that night. Not about his business or my past, but about smaller things. Books we'd read, places we'd traveled, the strange experience of living between cultures. "I spent 2 years in London," he said at one point, studying international business, which was my father's way of preparing me for succession. I hated every minute. Why? Because I wasn't allowed to simply be a student. I was always the heir, the representative. Even in a foreign city, I couldn't escape the weight of expectation. "Do you ever wish you could?" I asked. "Escape, I mean. Walk away from all of it." He was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Usually around 3 a.m. when I'm dealing with a crisis that wouldn't exist if people would just communicate honestly. But then I remember, walking away would mean leaving a power vacuum. And the people who'd fill that vacuum wouldn't maintain my father's code. They'd make my world worse, not better. So you're trapped by responsibility. We're all trapped by something, Sujinsi. The question is whether the cage we're in serves a purpose." It was the most honest conversation I'd had in months. Maybe years. No performance, no pretense. Just 2 exhausted people being real with each other. My official start date at the gallery arrived on a Monday. I dressed carefully in clothes that soon he had helped me choose. Professional but artistic, appropriate for the space I'd now be representing. The morning was perfect. Spring sunlight filled the gallery, making the white walls glow. Soon he showed me the coordination software, introduced me to the artists who'd be exhibiting next month, trusted me with decisions that felt significant. "You're a natural," she said around lunchtime. "I knew Jae-min was right about you." Around 3 p.m., the door chimed. I looked up from the catalog I was reviewing and froze. A woman entered, maybe 35, expensive clothes, perfect makeup, moving with the confidence of someone used to commanding space. Behind her, 2 men in suits flanked the entrance. Security. Or muscle, depending on how you looked at it. "You must be Soo-jin," she said in Korean, her voice pleasant, but with an edge underneath. The waitress turned gallery coordinator. How? Unexpected. Something in her tone made my skin prickle. "Can I help you with something?" I asked, maintaining professional composure. "I'm Park Yuna." She waited, as if the name should mean something. When I didn't react, her smile tightened. "Jae-min's fiancé." The world tilted. "Fiancé? I don't understand," I managed. "Of course you don't. He wouldn't have mentioned me." She walked further into the gallery, examining the art with disinterest. "We've been engaged for 2 years. Arrangement between families, very traditional. He tried to break it off last month, citing some nonsense about wanting authenticity in his personal life." She turned to face me directly. I wonder what inspired that sudden desire for authenticity. My mind was racing. Jae-min had mentioned an engagement to Hae-won, someone from his past. But that had ended. He'd said it ended. "I think there's been a mistake," I said carefully. "Whatever relationship you have with Jae-min has nothing to do with me. I'm just the woman he's been having dinner with, the one he gave a job to, despite having no qualifications, the one he reorganized half of Seoul's underground structure to protect." Park Yuna's smile was sharp. "Please, I have eyes everywhere, and everyone's talking about the waitress who caught his attention. You should discuss this with him." "Oh, I intend to. But first, I wanted to meet you. To understand what's so special about a woman with an expired visa and 2 minimum wage jobs that made him suddenly decide he deserves love rather than duty." The contempt in her voice was clear. But underneath it, I heard something else. Fear. She was afraid of losing him. Afraid I represented something she couldn't compete with. "I'm not trying to steal him from you," I said quietly. "We're friends, that's all." "Friends?" She laughed bitterly. "Men like Jae-min don't have friends. They have assets and liabilities. Which one are you?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. A text from Jae-min. "Yuna's heading to the gallery. Don't engage. I'm on my way." Too late. "He's worried about you," Park Yuna observed, watching my face. "That's interesting. He doesn't usually worry about people." "You should leave," I said, finding strength I didn't know I had. "This is a business establishment, and you're disrupting the space." Her eyes flashed. For a moment I thought she might escalate. But then her expression smoothed into practiced calm. "You're braver than you look. I can see why he's interested." She moved toward the door, her security following. "But bravery and naivety often look identical, Soo-jin-si. I hope for your sake you learn to tell the difference." She left, and I stood alone in the gallery, shaking. Engaged. He was engaged. Had been engaged this entire time? The door chimed again. Jae-min entered, his expression tight with barely controlled anger. He spotted me immediately, crossed the space in quick strides. "Did she threaten you? You're engaged?" The words came out flat, emotionless. He stopped, something like pain flickering across his face. I was. "It's complicated." "How complicated?" "Because she seems to think it's current." "Sit down. Please, let me explain." We sat in Soon-hee's office, away from the gallery's windows. Jaemin's composure was fractured in a way I'd never seen. Park Yuna and I were engaged, he began. An arrangement between families. Her father runs the Southern Territories, and the marriage would have unified significant power structures. I agreed because it made strategic sense and because I didn't think I deserved anything else. What changed? You. He met my eyes. That note you wrote reminded me that I'm human, that I deserve human connection. I broke off the engagement 3 weeks ago, offered her family compensation, assured them the alliance could continue without marriage. They agreed. She didn't. She said 2 years. We've been engaged for 2 years, yes, but the engagement was barely real. We saw each other maybe once a month, formal dinners where we discussed strategy rather than personal matters. It was a business arrangement, nothing more. Did you tell me this before? No. He looked away. And that was wrong. I should have mentioned it when I offered you the job, but I was afraid you'd say no, that you'd think I was using you to escape an obligation, rather than genuinely wanting your presence in my life. I wanted to be angry, should have been angry, but I just felt tired. I need honesty, Jaemin. That's what we agreed on. You're right, and I'm sorry. I should have told you. He pulled out his phone, showing me a formal document. This is the dissolution agreement, signed by both families' representatives last week. It's over. Legally, officially over. But she doesn't accept it. She's having difficulty letting go. Not because she loves me. We've never loved each other. But because the arrangement gave her status, power, access. Without it, she loses position. I studied the document, the legal language confirming what he'd said. The engagement was formally dissolved, all parties in agreement, except apparently not all parties. She's going to make trouble, I said. Probably. But that's my problem to handle, not yours. I won't let her near you again. I can handle myself. I know. He smiled slightly. You told her to leave. Soon, he called me immediately, said you stood up to one of Seoul's most intimidating women without flinching. That's impressive. I was terrified. Bravery and terror aren't mutually exclusive. He reached across the desk, his hand hovering near mine but not quite touching. I'm sorry. For not being completely honest. For letting her find you like that. It won't happen again. You can't promise that. Your world is complicated. You said so yourself. Then let me promise this. No more relevant secrets. You deserve to know what you're walking into. I looked at his hand, still not quite touching mine. A man trapped by duty, trying to carve out space for humanity. A criminal with a code, exhausted from maintaining it alone. And I'd chosen to be in his life, knowing it would be complicated. Okay, I said finally. No more secrets. No more secrets. His hand closed over mine, warm and steady, and something in his expression shifted, relief mixed with something deeper, something I couldn't quite name. The door chimed. Soon-hee's voice called out, Soo-jin, we have potential buyers for the Kim Soo-jin piece. Work. Normal, mundane work that had nothing to do with criminal empires or broken engagements. I stood, squeezing Jaemin's hand once before releasing it. I need to get back to my actual job. Of course. He stood as well. But tonight? Can we talk more? Somewhere private? Your mother's house? If you're comfortable with that. I nodded, and he left, slipping out through the back entrance to avoid being seen by the potential buyers. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of professional discussions and careful curation. But my mind kept returning to Jaemin's expression when he'd said, "You're right," about honesty. The vulnerability in his admission that he'd been afraid I'd refuse the job if I'd known about the engagement. That evening, Minseo drove me to the hillside house. Jae-min waited on the porch again, but this time he looked different, less composed, more openly worried. "Thank you for coming." "We need to talk," I said. We sat in the main room with tea neither of us drank. The silence felt heavy. "I want you to understand something," I finally said. "I'm not here to fix you, or save you, or complete you. I'm here because you offered me a legitimate opportunity, and because I thought we could be honest with each other. That's all. I know. But if there are more surprises, more ex-fiancés or business complications or dangerous rivals, I need to know. I can't navigate your world blindly." "You're right, completely right." He leaned forward, his intensity focused entirely on me. "I've been operating alone for so long that I forgot what it means to let someone in, to trust someone with the full truth. But I want to learn. With you." "Why me?" "Really. Not the romantic answer about humanity and tired eyes. The real answer." He was quiet for a long moment, considering. "Because you asked if I was okay," he said finally. "And then you didn't expect anything in return. No agenda, no manipulation, just simple kindness from someone who had no idea who I was. That's so rare in my world it might as well be magic." "I'm not magic. I'm just a woman who wrote a stupid note. That stupid note saved my life. And more than that, it reminded me that my life is worth saving. That I'm more than the role I play." His voice dropped. "You see me, Soo-jin-si, not the power or the position, just me, that's why." I didn't know what to say to that. Didn't have words for the enormity of what he was offering. Connection, honesty, the chance to matter to someone who'd forgotten what mattering felt like. "I see you too," I whispered. "The exhaustion, the weight you carry, the way you're trying so hard to be better than your circumstances. I see all of it. Is that enough? For friendship? For whatever this is becoming?" I thought about it. Thought about my mother's insistence that I live fully. About the past weeks of learning to exist openly rather than invisibly. About Jae-min's tired eyes and the way they'd shifted when he'd read my note. "Yes," I said. "It's enough." He smiled, a real smile, unguarded and beautiful. "Then let's figure out what honest friendship looks like. No more secrets, no more careful performance. Just us." "Just us," I agreed. And in that quiet house on the hillside, we talked until dawn, about fears and hopes, about the strange paths that had led us both to this moment, about the risk of being seen and the greater risk of staying invisible. By morning, Seoul spread below us like a sea of light, and I understood something I hadn't before. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is accept kindness when it's offered. Sometimes the greatest risk is allowing yourself to be human in a world that wants you to be anything else. And sometimes a stupid note written by a tired waitress can change everything. Not because it's magic, but because it reminds someone that connection is possible even in the darkest corners of life. Jae-min walked me to the car as the sun rose, his hand finding mine in the morning light. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for taking the risk, for seeing me, for staying." "Thank you," I replied, "for remembering I'm human too." Minseo drove me home through morning traffic, and I watched Seoul wake up around me, this city that had almost broken me, that had forced me into shadows, that was now offering me light. My phone buzzed. A text from Jae-min. "Same time next week? I want to show you something." I smiled, typing back, "Yes, but you're making breakfast. That's the deal." His response came immediately. "Deal. But I'm a terrible cook. Then we'll order takeout and pretend you made it. That's what friends do." And in his hillside house, Jaemin read that message and laughed, a real laugh, unforced and genuine, while looking at a simple note that had changed everything, written by a woman who'd reminded him that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is ask if someone's okay. Because in a world built on power and calculation, on careful control and strategic distance, kindness is revolutionary. And being seen, truly seen, is the rarest gift of all.